Okay. So these are just some ideas that I took from other places, from other people's talks, from my experience with citizen advocacy, and from some of the teaching of this fellow Wolfensberger. But most of it's pretty much common sense. That there's nothing really radical in this. There's not a lot of particular ideas, but I think there are things in here that if we're involved with people who are elderly or older, getting older, that they're important things to think about and just to consider. And I'm kind of moving towards the idea of thinking about older people and about the vulnerability that they have in lots of domains of life, but most particularly in terms of healthcare, in terms of really what can become life and death issues, and some of the thoughts about how important it is to have friends, advocates who will speak up on a person's behalf and who are conscious of their vulnerability and really want things that to work out for them to have kind of the good things in life. So I thought, and I don't know how long this will take. It might be that I can talk for an hour and a quarter. It might be that I only have half an hour's worth of stuff to say. With the size group we have here, if people want to interrupt, if I'm not clear about something or people have an example they want to give, um, please feel free to do that. Um, and, to offer some comment, to offer some suggestion. All right, we all set to go? So I thought,
Good.
first in getting started, like I'm getting older, and one of the things that occurred to me, it'd be boring for the rest of you, but that I could just tell you about what my life is like these days, and that's like the examples of all these things, like just come at me from what's happened in my life for the last month and what's going to happen to my life in the next month. Like getting a hip replacement operation in 2 weeks is one of the things that's coming up for me. But anyhow, that just a reality that we get older, as we get older, that there are changes. It's just part of getting older that there's real changes, and that some of those are physical changes. And those of us who are older, we all know this, but it's important. It's obvious, but let's just call it for what it is. I can't do the things I used to do. I need to have the deck on the side of our house replaced. And 20 years ago, I would have done it myself. I can't do that anymore. It's like kind of beyond my physical abilities. So physically, there's loss there, there's changes, and mentally as well. We laugh at each other all the time about how we have to remind each other what the right word is. The frequency of time in which, my wife and I has to tell each other somebody's name, remind about somebody's name that's going up. We all know these things, but just call it for what it is. A place where we'll have a good bit of focus, throughout the course of the time that we spend together tonight is in terms of social changes that come in life as well. And social changes in terms of the number and depth of relationships we have, but also social changes in terms of what others see of us, how others look at us as we get older people, as we get older, kind of whether people, that there's like a change, that we're no longer, or I'm no longer a contributing, participating employee, worker person. I'm retired, and that it changes the social response of others to me as the roles I have in life, the parts I play in life change. So there's social changes, and I'll talk about that, and spiritual changes as well. I think oftentimes as people get older, they actually increase the focus that they have in some areas of their life because it becomes more important. It's the like a spiritual side to life is it's not drowned out so much by the just the business of getting through life, of raising kids, and holding down a job and stuff. Um, I think, though, also a big reality in all the domains, really, except for the spiritual domain, is that where there's a loss of some of our capabilities, and that really a pretty dominant word, if we were to summarize the life experience of people as they get older, loss is a real powerful thing. Loss of physical capabilities, loss of mental capabilities, loss of energy, of strength, endurance, loss of relationships with others, loss of the kind of the roles that we fulfilled in life. You know, that Nate mentioned I was the executive director at North Quabbin Citizen Advocacy for all those years. I don't have that role anymore. And that was a main role in my life, you know, as far as what took my time. And as far as most of the people in the North Quabbin area who I knew, I worked at North Quabbin Citizen Advocacy. And that role is just not part of my life anymore. So I've lost some of the roles that I had, and I've lost some of my capabilities as well. And I've lost a lot of people as well. As people get older, others in our age group and Jan's in my age group, people die, people pass away. And along with the loss of some capabilities, there's another reality of an increasing dependence on others, and that's a hard thing, I think, for all of us as we get older. That we're used to. I'm used to other people like depending on me, and me being in a place where I can be really helpful to other people, and where I can be helpful to other people in many more ways than there can be helpful to me. But a reality in life for people as they get older in general is that we become more dependent on others, you know, and can be more dependent on others for building a new deck on the side of our house. It can be more dependent on others even for just getting a ride, you know, or getting to the doctor or weeding a garden. You know, getting down there and then getting back up just isn't as easy as it was once upon a time. So that's part of the deal, you know, and that's um, anywhere, any place, kind of any time that as we get older, that there are changes. As we become elderly, the changes continue. That makes sense in a way that's really obvious, but it's just kind of calling it for what it is. Now, when I worked at Citizen Advocacy, we had an orientation packet, you know, a set of orient pieces of paper that we would give each new advocate. And this is a bit of a modified version of one of those pieces of paper. And it kind of summarizes one way or my way or ways that I've thought about what it is, about what it means to be getting older. So just to kind of look at each of these points, and some of this I've said already, but kind of building from that starting out point. And that first point is that there's a common reality for elders that they lose, and this continues on a continuing basis, some of their capabilities, mental and physical, some of their personal connections, you know, family, friends, even spouses, and sources of income as well. That as people get older, they become, well, they live on fixed incomes, many people do. That's just a common reality. And because the elders lose on a continuing basis some of their capabilities, some of their financial resources, as a result, the second point, elders usually have gradually increasing needs for additional supports. If you can't do things for yourself, you're going to need help from others. And that dependence on others really creates a real vulnerability for people in all spheres of their lives. And this is a key point, you know, that I think, anyhow, that if you can't kind of look after things and manage stuff yourself as well as you used to, you don't have money to kind of like pay for as much money to pay for some of the assistance that you might need. You don't have sometimes a spouse to help with things, you know, on a very immediate basis. That growing dependence on others, it creates a real vulnerability that things go wrong and you got less resource, or they're more likely to go wrong, you know, physically, mentally, health wise, whatever. And that you have fewer resources, fewer capabilities of dealing with those things yourself. So bad things are more likely to happen. And as we get older, we're kind of less able to just like manage it ourselves to get through that. I mean, it's just, that's a common fact. I think it's true. So if we're dependent on others, if others people provide that support in good ways, your life as an elder person can be pretty secure. You know, you stay in your home, you keep on, if you're a rich person, you get to keep on going to the club. You can have lots of interesting experiences, whether it's with travel or a big thing in our lives is with our grandchildren. It could be quite meaningful, you know, if others provide the support in good ways that people need. But, and this is a pretty hard and harsh reality, that others' negative attitudes and actions often have a negative and even hurtful, even wounding impact on older people's life experiences. That if you kind of need practical help, but other people start looking at you that, he's not helping me out anymore. He's such a burden. That kind of a negative attitude in terms of giving the help. Um, that's hurtful. That sometimes others' negative attitudes get to the point where they say, I'm just not going to be involved with him anymore. And of course, this happens to people with disabilities as well. Other people will say, it's too challenging or too difficult to be involved with this person. So a person gets put at a distance, you know? So that is a reality, and it's really hurtful. Others' attitudes are the ways that others respond to each of us, whether it's a person who doesn't have disabilities and is young and strong and hale and hearty, or a person who's older and they're more dependent on others. That others' response, the way others treat a person, has a huge impact. Good, positive support, helpful support, my life can be secure, rich, and meaningful. If others have negative attitudes, it can have really negative impact and hurtful, wounding impact. And that when things happen, when other people don't treat a person well, those negative, the bad things that tend to happen or can happen to an older person creates pressing needs. So make a couple examples of this, that if no one wants to spend time with you or no one wants to have dinner with you and you end up eating alone, like people with disabilities do, this guy Ed, whose money I've been managing for years, it's true in his life, and it happens to older people, especially if the spouse passes away, that it's the fact that they don't have anybody to have a meal with. It's not built into their getting older, but they end up being lonely. And when people are lonely and they are eating alone, one of the things that they found, doing in research, and it's pretty obvious, really, is that they don't eat as well. They don't eat as much. They don't eat as well. They don't eat as regularly, and that undermines a person's health. So, just in that one domain, that if other people aren't responding in a way that really helps a person to like spend good amounts of time with other people, that response of others creates a real pressing need for someone to have like more involvement with other people, someone to have dinner with.
My mother is a good example of that. She's now in the nursing home, but she had been at home. She had the Meals on Wheels. She wouldn't eat them. We'd bring stuff. And toward the end, she wasn't even eating any of those. I don't know what the heck she was eating, but her health went way down. Her heart stuff went way off. Her medications got all messed up. And now she's got to be a resident at a nursing home. So it's tough.
It's tough. And I mean, it's a part of that's the reality, just getting older and people lose some of their capabilities. But then a part of it is that, she didn't have the other people like right there with her. And that the option that we create in our world, and I'll talk about this in a minute for people, older people in that situation, tends to be the nursing home, and why don't we have older people set up to live in groups of 3 or 4, with some support that's right there for them all the time, in a place that's homey instead of being a nursing home, like we just don't do that. That's others' response, we're just not creative about it. So ordinary human needs become pressing needs, and that we need to think too that older people with disabilities, they need support from others that address the full range of their needs, needs for companionship with others, to feel part of things, to be able to make some contribution, to be for people to like be glad to see them. But they also have need for medical care and somebody to cut the grass if you can't, walk behind the lawnmower well enough, There's a whole range of practical needs in all different kinds of areas. So this is a common reality for older people, that others aren't responding in a positive way, that there's negative attitudes, And a big piece of this, and this is kind of the next big point here, a big piece of this is the negative attitudes towards older people. It's not just a I problem as far as how I treat this person, whatever. My attitudes shape my personal response, but there's also a thing that goes on kind of at the level of a whole society. And that this fellow Wolfensberger, he coined the word devaluation, that when people are different, like they're older, that's a differentness. And people get defined by that differentness, that the aged, or even there's language sometimes that people, as they get older, they get referred to as being geriatric, you know, that instead of being like, Tom, who's getting to be an older guy, that we get defined as geriatric, and the differentness is valued negatively. The person gets devalued negatively, and in the level of a whole society, we treat people in hurtful ways. And I think for older people, that when older people kind of get excluded from employment like they used to, there was mandatory retirement, that's a negative response of the society to older people. When older people get put into nursing homes, that's a negative response of a whole society to a whole class of older people. When we don't think creatively about how we might address the full range of their needs, they get defined as being an elderly sick person, and they get put into a nursing facility. And that people need a lot more in life than nursing care. Good nursing care is great, by the way, but good nursing care doesn't give you a reason to get out of bed in the morning. It doesn't bring you joy. It doesn't get you fresh air. It doesn't bring you a sense of contribution. So the point here, this is the others' treatment of folks as they get older, individually, collectively, on the level of a society. And it tends to be patterns of devaluation. Older people aren't as valued. And this is, in some ways, this sounds like it's philosophizing at a distant level, but it's just a concrete part of the experience of it, that, I've got kids. My wife and I have 3 kids, and that, we're blessed that they all live nearby, and they're helpful, to varying extents and in different ways. But that a thing that I start to experience after having for 45 years been the parent, who was kind of the wise person and the advisor and the guide, the experienced person, that my kids, sometimes it seems like now they start to think that they know better about how my wife and I should live our lives than we do. I see Pamela smiling, that Jessica's not smiling, but Pamela's smiling about that, but that's not built into getting older, in other societies, when what I understand happened in China and stuff, that when you got older, that you got an awful lot more respect, and people would come to you looking for your advice and for your guidance. And the idea that, your kids would start telling you how to live your life just wasn't part of the deal there, So there's a social thing, and it's not mean-spirited at all, but it's kind of in the air that we breathe, that, as people get older, they really aren't quite as interesting or valuable to spend time with. They're not quite as capable as they were. They're not really helpful in the same ways that they were. They get to be a bit of a burden, and that's not built into the fact of getting older. One of my memories about how the devaluation business works out in the lives of older people was a conversation that I had with my mother, oh Lord, quite a while ago, 30 years. And that my dad had passed away, and she was having a hip operation. And she was wondering if she'd been living alone in the house that I grew up in Buffalo, New York. And she was wondering if she'd be bounce back enough. She was in her 80s at the time to be able to, go back home and live at home. So we were talking about the possibility that, we would kind of put an addition onto our house and she could come and live with us. And one thing she said to me is that she said, I remember very clearly, she said, I don't want to be a burden, And what occurred to me is that whether she was a burden didn't have anything to do with how much support she needed from us. Whether she was a burden had to do with what was in our heads, was our attitudes, you know? And that if you can do a whole lot for somebody, and if you see it as being a burden, then the person is a burden to you. But if you do a whole lot for somebody and you don't see it as being a burden, they're not a burden. Does that make sense? You know,
Mhm.
that whether someone's a burden or not is in the eye of the beholder more than it's in the reality of being a support to a person. You know, from what I understand, people like Mother Teresa, that they could, you know, clean people up when they were very ill and their bodies were very unpleasant to touch, but she didn't see them as a burden. And it's not that, you know, I'm Mother Teresa by any means, but is that making sense to you? You know, that this is whether we really value a person. So, and out of that, this business of devaluation, when people get to be devalued, older people, there's a number of common experiences, and I'm just going to mention these quickly so we can kind of get on further to what, you know, the business about protection. But maybe at this point, it'd be good to say, does anybody, am I making any sense with this? Does anybody think I'm nuts? Does anybody have an example they'd want to give?
Can you go back to the last slide briefly, please?
This one?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, I haven't really talked through this one yet.
Okay, that's all right. I didn't read it all. I've got it now. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought I should stop for a couple of questions before or comments, or I can just
Okay.
keep talking if you want me to do that too.
I found it interesting, Tom, how you talk about your mother saying that she didn't want to be a burden, and that probably didn't even come from you or Jan. It was just the larger society. Like it's an overall fear of older folks or people with disabilities. They don't want to be a burden to their families, and it's not even necessarily true that their families have acted in such a way. It's in the culture. It's in the air we breathe. One of the typical feelings that people have. I'm not being very articulate, but it's
Yeah,
not necessarily that the person has even heard that. Oh yes, you're a burden.
yeah, this idea of devaluation, you know, what's going on in the society, what's in the air around us. It's really helpful as a way to think about how things work for people with disabilities, for people of color, for and for older people as well. And like one of them there is that um, kids these days, they've done surveys, and most kids these days think that they will end up spending the last days, weeks, months, maybe years of their lives in a nursing home. That's what kids think is, you know, at the end of life for people. And when I was a kid, people didn't think that, you know, that people expected that did not expect that they would go to a nursing home. The point of
Mhm.
that being that kind of what's in the culture around us, what's in the social air around us, it shapes our minds, our expectations for what might be.
Yesterday, I was visited my mother, and she made comment about her tooth bothering, or something was wrong with her tooth. And I said, have you said anything to the nurses yet? And oh no, she wasn't going to say anything to anybody. And then I said, made comment to the nurse about it, and said, yeah, that's the older people are, some of these things they just want to keep private. They don't want to tell anybody. They'll tell you a family member maybe, but they won't tell the staff or anything. They're going to have their privateness, and not be involved.
Mm-hmm.
I had a chance to visit a place years ago now that was like a residential place for older people where you could move into your own apartment, and Then if you lost some more of your capabilities, that you get your own apartment, but you could go down the hall for a meal. And then if you had more problems, that you'd move into their nursing home section, or rest home kind of section. And then if you got more infirm, you'd go to their skilled nursing facility. And in this place, we interviewed some of the people there and got to know them, just chit chat kind of stuff, like you were doing with your mom, Mrs. Gale, and that they told us that they hid all of their problems, and they hid their problems, like if they'd fall down, they wouldn't tell anybody, because they didn't want to be demoted, kind of out of the degree of independence that they still had, So, I mean, you can understand that, and like I understood that, like I would do that, I'm not telling them. I don't want to go into the nursing home part. I want to keep on making my own meals.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
Anyhow, you had your hand up, Will?
yes, like you said, people like me, I still live at home with of course, my dad and my stepmother, and I like to do stuff in the community, and I like doing my own stuff, going to work every day, going to certain activities in town, and it's always fun to get out and do stuff that what I like to do, and I feel valued and
Yeah.
have family and friends. I'm involved with so many event organizations in Orange. Besides, I just joined the Orange Revitalization Partnership was a few weeks ago, and I'm on the beautifying committee, and I'm also adopted a music room at the Orange Historical Society, and I like music because I like to go to band concerts every Friday evening in Butterfield Park, and I saw you guys in Petersham too last week, so
Yep.
That was a nice concert, and I love music. That's why I adopted the music room, and I made a photo album of so many pictures from prior band concerts and over the years, and I'm known as a fully as a whole person by doing that. And plus, I do the tours on Sunday afternoons. We were busy yesterday with tours, so I talked about the music room and the alumni room and all that. I love doing that stuff.
So one of the lessons, trying to think, well, looking at these common life experiences and then what people need, and
Mhm.
these are things that it applies, Nate. It plays well. I mean, for folks with some disabilities, big disabilities, minor disabilities. It
Mhm.
applies for older people. It applies for all of us.
Right.
That these are things that we all need, and that one is that we all need to like stay involved and be active with stuff. Just
That's right.
home alone, like some people are all the time, is
Mhm.
and like you were saying, Mrs. Gale, that happened to your mom. That if you're home alone all the time, even if people come by and visit, that it's people need to stay involved and they need support to stay involved. And then for some people, you do that on your own, Will, but
Yeah.
for some people, they really need other people to give them a lot of support to do that. And sometimes it can be really hard.
Mhm.
People can get into a place where, in order to stay involved with others, that it's just too much effort to go out, and people have to go to them, and it can take a tremendous amount of time and effort and energy to provide support to people who are
Mhm.
in more serious situations. But I think we all need to have like our involvement with others.
Yeah, in fact, speaking of involvement, and of course, I was just recently just elected, I think, board member, whatever, on the North Cloven Citizen Advocacy by Nate. So, Nate, I want to thank you for letting me be on board. So, I
Oh,
appreciate
you're
it very
welcome.
much.
Well, we're excited to have you. And another, I'm just thinking another example Will's showing is the power of valued roles, which I'm sure Tom you're getting to, and
Yep.
even that can even impact somebody in a rest home positively if they can maintain
Mhm.
at least some of the valued roles.
And
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to helping out at the drive-through dinner in a couple of weeks. So that'll be fun.
one of the things that happens with a number of older people, I guess,
Anyway.
with my wife, with others, that a valued role is the role of church lady, and that, my wife is becoming more and more of a church lady since she's mostly retired. She's also kept valued role as she's a part-time employee and worker, so this idea of like staying active, staying involved, being in valued roles, continuing to have chances to make contributions, it helps other people to value and respect you, and it also just gives meaning to life. I just want to make a couple points here. I'm kind of conscious of the time and want to keep moving along. That there's the reality as we get older that we do have more impairments, physical and mental. Impairments are reality of life, for many people, age-related impairments being one part of it. An issue, though, is that sometimes people get defined by their impairment, and that instead of like, well, I'm going to pick on Nate for a minute here, that, Nate, he could be seen as the wheelchair guy, but let's think like Nate is not defined by his impairment. He's known fully as a whole person. He can be a bit of a pain sometimes, but Nate is Nate. And the fact that he rides in a wheelchair, it's a part of like the reality of being involved with Nate. And it's supporting him to stay involved and do stuff as a part of the reality of being involved with Nate. But basically, I mean, Nate's Nate, and this other stuff is just a little part of it. It's not the whole picture. Nate gets respected, and valued. And Nate has deep acceptance. A key point that, like you mentioned, Mrs. Gale, I'm picking on you because you mentioned your mom in the nursing home, so I hope it's okay. But that a lot of people in the nursing home don't have anybody who visits regularly, and that kind of rejection, from the people who, that's really a really bad thing. It opens the doorway to all kinds of other stuff happening.
Excuse me.
If there's having a few people, or in citizen advocacy, even one person who looks to accept a person and stay involved with them and stand by them, that can make a huge difference. Picking on your mom's toothache, right? If you didn't visit her and hear that, she wouldn't have told anybody. And if she didn't tell anybody, the toothaches don't get better. And then you don't eat as well. And sometimes it's an infection, So just at that very basic level, one person who comes by, continues to accept and to know and to love and to listen, it's life-saving. So people lose a lot of relationships as they get older because people die, they can't get away. People need their family and friends even more. And that it was lovely all these years spending time with our kids and with our grandchildren. It's really important to us now that we have those involvements with them. It's a main source of fulfillment in our lives. Another reality is that people get bored. The people just, Will talks to us about his life. Will is not a bored person, but there are people.
I'm not bored at all. There's never a dull moment in
Never a dull-
most of
that's
my
good.
life. But there's once in a while that it could be at times, but I hate to say it, I don't like to say it. It was pretty dull when we were in isolation time during COVID.
Yep. Well, that's true for all of us. It helps us to
Everybody, yeah,
understand what it's like. Yeah.
that's right.
I'm thinking with our citizen advocacy work of having a conversation with a lady who lives over in Athol, and she was quite capable. She took care of her own place. She just had staff people who'd come in and help her do her shopping and, maybe do a little cooking or cleaning, budget her money kind of stuff. But she was managed basically her own life. And, but she didn't get out. She didn't have friends and didn't get out much. She was just home all the time. And what she said to us, we talked to her about what might we ask an advocate to do if getting involved with her. And what she said was, I want somebody to see me every Saturday. And when we asked a little further, what we found was that she'd come home from this day program thing that she was involved with on a Friday. and then she'd be home alone until like Sunday afternoon when somebody came by to spend an hour with her, right? And that kind of boredom, that kind of limited activity, it's not good for a person physically or mentally. It's not good for their heart, you know. It's just like emptiness, I guess, not having any roles at all. People need meaningful engagement. We talked already, I mentioned the story about my mom, you know, being seen as a burden. And we talked when we had that conversation about ways that she would probably contribute, you know, that she might have been here with us and she wasn't going to be cutting the grass, but she could cook. She could spend time with kids. She could help fold laundry. She could do laundry. She could tell stories. She could read books, you know, find ways to help people continue making contributions. It's important. We've talked about nursing homes, but there's people lose their autonomy. They lose their freedom even when they move into places like that. People need to have their freedom preserved. They need to have their opinions continue to be listened to. And stable long-term relationships, you know, family being a main source of this, but advocates as well. Lots of the advocates that citizen advocacy's recruited have been involved with people for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, you know, stable relationships, people who know you and care. That's a real need that we all have. And I made the point earlier about vulnerability. And some of the stories here are stories about vulnerability even under the death, that if somebody doesn't eat, or if somebody has a bad tooth, you know, or also there's vulnerability in the hospital to medical care, where people, I can tell stories of this from my own experience, that there's a fellow Lawrence, who rode to church with my wife or myself for about 20 years. Lawrence has been gone now for, 15 years, 10, 15 years. But he rode to church with us on Sundays until he was 90. And that Lawrence actually had the same business with his tooth. And he told people at the nursing home about it, but they just thought he was being a cranky old man, and they didn't do anything about it. And I complained about it some, and nothing much happened either. And then I mentioned it to somebody we knew from church. Lawrence rode to church with us, you know, and she worked third shift in that nursing home. And she said, we need to check out this guy's tooth. And they did, and they found out that he had his tooth pulled and there was a fragment still in there. They took the fragment out, his mouth stopped hurting, and he started eating again. You know, so that's a little tiny thing, but without his friends speaking up for him, Lawrence would have died years earlier. You know, or again, there was a lady, Penelope, who's involved with citizen advocacy years ago, and she was friends with this fella, David. And David had he had a thing with his heart, you know, some kind of a heart problem. And she was with him at the doctor's, and the doctor said, you know, this is a pretty serious problem. And that probably what's going to happen is that some night he'll go to sleep and he'll just like pass away quietly during the night, you know, and probably not live for very long. So Penelope said, looked at him, and she'd heard this vulnerability even unto the death, the idea of death making for people who are in this devalued status. So she said, if this were your father who had this kind of heart problem, what would you do? What would happen? And the doctor was taken aback for a minute. And then he said, well, he'd probably be getting operated on within the next 2 days. And David got operated on within the next 2 days and lived for another 10 years. So that's the importance of people's like kind of being conscious of the vulnerabilities. And then really when your friends are looking to speak up or stick up for a person, bending over backwards in order to speak up on their behalf. Try and keep their vulnerability from turning into a wound and turning into a hurt. So, all in all areas, I think what works best for people is these things. For elders, for people with disabilities, for everybody, is that it works best when people like they live in real homes. You know, for older people, homes like where younger people live. And if it can't be like if you got to have a hospital bed, you can have a hospital bed in a real home. You know, the idea before, like, why do we do 100-person nursing homes instead of 4 or 5 people places? For people with intellectual disabilities, you know, it used to be that they said, well, if they're going to, if they don't have a home to live in with their families, then they need to live in an institution with 1,000 people. And somebody had a different idea. And now, like in Massachusetts, nobody lives in big with an intellectual disability. You know, lives in a great big institution like that. That people who need a good bit of assistance and support, they live in a place with just 3 or 4 people. Places that are much more homey. And that's what works for people, whether they're old or young, whether they learn slowly or learn fast. Homes that are homey work for people. And being out in the community and being part of things in the community instead of being segregated away in some kind of institution or facility. I think what works best for people who, as they get older, is to spend time with people of all ages. I'm glad to spend some time with older people, you know, to have the aches and pains conversation, you know, and to reminisce about times gone by. People who remember when the Beatles were big. I think that's a wonderful part of life. It's also really important to me, anyhow, to spend time with my children, you know, to be helpful to them as I can be and for them to be helpful to us. And to read to my grandchildren, you know. One of my real pleasures these days is that my 4-year-old granddaughter just turned 4. She's really into a book called Two Bad Ants, you know, little ants, little creatures. And that, so every time she comes over, not every time, most every time, I read her that story about these ants like crawling into the house and finding a bowl of sugar and how exciting it is, you know, to have all that sugar. Anyhow, you don't need to know about Two Bad Ants, but it's a pleasure to read that to little Liza. And then another thing is that we need specialized support, you know, that older people oftentimes do need specialized support in some way. Medical and other specialized services, true of people with other disabilities, you know, who need specialized supports. But I think what works best for people is to keep those in the background, so that the specialized supports that we receive as we get older, they don't become like the main thing that's right out front, the banner that's out there, that you keep it in the background. So I'm here talking to you and you know that I'm going to have this hip operation, but it's not like I'm talking about my hip operation all the time, that I have other things in life. You know, I have, I have a hip operation coming up 2 weeks from today. I keep saying hip operation, fixating at my support team. But I also, like, I had to get ready to do this talk tonight, come up with this little slideshow. And I had to confirm with Nate and Jessica about the arrangements and about recording it. And what else? I have another meeting with Nate and Jessica next week, a couple of them actually. And I'm involved with our church, and that I'm the moderator at our church. And that before I go in for my surgery, and with the whole pandemic thing happening, I have like, I think it's 5 meetings this week, you know, with different committees and people in church about how we're going to like reopen in the fall, which we're still whenever. You understand, like, and like I mentioned to people there that I'm having a hip operation. There's somebody who's been designated or will get designated as being kind of the what fill in moderator if something comes up in the church while I'm like not around. But that's the fact my hip operation is a small part of who I am. You know, does that make sense? Keep that in the background. Have some, you know, live in a real home. Have some real stuff going on with life out in the world. Spend time with people of all ages, including a family reunion, you know, with my brother and his descendants as well. And then keep the medical and other stuff in the background. Some key words, I think, as far as being involved with people as they get older, people who have disabilities, this applies as well, is to really accept people, to accept them individually and personally, and to do that in a way that's respectful. You know, and respect, these are things that they're genuine. I'll pick on Nate again here. That Nate and I have this relationship where we actually say some fairly mean things to each other on a pretty consistent basis. And but at the core of it, like we accept each other and we really respect each other, you know? We're just doing like country guy teasing or poking fun kinds of things. Or at least I think that's what we're doing. Maybe Nate means it when he says, cruel things to me. But you understand, like, it's a question of heart,
I tried not to pick on you for being old tonight, Tom, because I thought that would be kind of awkward because of the topic.
Right. Well, I haven't picked on you for having a disability, but anyhow, we'll move on. Another key thing is that, I think if we're going to look to be helpful to somebody who's vulnerable and devalued status, whether they're older or whatever, is there has to be heartfelt engagement. I think really caring is important. I remember with Lawrence at one point in time, they moved him from the Quabbin Valley, it was the Fleetwood back then, down to this rest home down in Worcester. And I went and I said, don't do that. He'll lose me and my family. The church that we go to on Sundays, his cousin lives in Athol. And they said, well, you're too emotionally involved, in order to have a valid opinion, And like,
Who better to have opinion?
exactly. If people are sticking up for me and are involved, I want them to care about me, hopefully love me and want what's best for me, and not like be looking at me as a clinical list of deficiencies. I think another positive response is long-term relationship potential. If you're getting involved and being helpful to a person, which is something we all like to do, I think, is be helpful to each other. You want it to have long-term potential. Another part of it is connections into community life, that in looking to be helpful to each other, that we need to not only like have a heartfelt engagement ourselves, but look to involve a person in community life in other ways. And I think with older people as well, it's really helpful if people give practical assistance. That it just helps, And if people do that like in a good spirit, my daughter is really wonderful with this with us. That she has two boys who are, I think, how old are they? 14 and 12, or 14 and 11. And like in the summertime, she brings them over about once every 2 weeks. And they do the heavy lifting stuff around here for me. That whether it's digging up our septic tank or tearing the brush down on this hillside, or will they do weeding as well, or raking, hauling leaves, hauling branches. Trying to think of all the jobs I've given them. Anyhow, I pay them exorbitantly. They don't demand it, but they're grandchildren, so they make out like bandits, but that we feed them as well. But the practical help, and it's done from my daughter, it's done with a good spirit, and actually from our grandchildren, it's with a pretty good spirit. You have to kind of supervise them, otherwise they're never mind. But they're not nasty about it. Another part of the positive response to people who are devalued, vulnerable, is to really have advocacy for greater opportunity, to push for more opportunity. And I think of all the examples of relationships that the citizen advocacy program supports. One lady, I can't remember names anymore, Nate, but a lady who was living in Athol and had significant health problems, I think vision problems as well, and that her advocate got her involved in a church and church life again.
I think you're talking about Yvonne, who many people know was matched with Ruth White. Yvonne passed away, but yeah, Ruth White brought her into the community church of North Orange and Tully.
And for Yvonne and like for Lawrence as well, that the opportunity to be part of things in community life, for Lawrence, I know that was what kept him going. looking forward to that Sunday getting out. My youngest son wrote his high school senior essay about Lawrence, and the title of it was, what was it? 2 hours for a lifetime, with the idea that those 2 hours every week were the thing that kept him going. That and probably the candy bars that he smuggled back into the nursing home from his visits with us as well. And then a key point, and the last thing I really want to look to emphasize here is that, in the context when I've talked about all the bad things that can happen to people, and there's certainly bad things in other ways. They can have their money stolen, be taken advantage of, and that way, poor health care, hassle with landlords, being evicted, rent increase, kinds of things, all kinds of hassles. That where people are vulnerable, they need protection in their areas of vulnerability. And that hopefully from this little talk, from the thinking we do here, that if we're involved with older people, we're all a little bit more aware of, a little more thoughtful about some of those areas of vulnerability. And that when somebody's not in a good place, either because they lack the skills or the confidence, or because people just won't listen to them, they need other people to kind of stand up for them, to offer them protection so they're vulnerable. If you're going to give good protection where things might go wrong for people, including most especially in the healthcare system, I mean, that's a pretty serious spot, but in other areas as well. One is that if people understand the realities about devaluation, wounding, and vulnerability, if they think of that as the problem, that that puts them in a better place to speak up on somebody's behalf. And another is to doubt the questions of the powers and of the experts, to doubt to doubt them and to question the powers and the experts. That when somebody starts to say things like they did at the nursing home to me with Lawrence, that you're too emotionally involved, and that we know what's best as far as the placement for Lawrence. If you're going to be effective in like offering protection to somebody, you got to be open to questioning them. On another occasion, these are just my experiences with Lawrence. On another occasion, Lawrence went in for a minor operation. He had a hernia, and when they gave him the initial, tranquilizer shot, IV to get calmed down, his heart rate dropped down to like 25, which is not good. And they brought him back, and then they came, and I was sitting in the hospital. Wasn't his guardian or anything, but there was nobody else. So they said, like we kind of brought him back and stabilized him. Well, can he get do you want him to have a pacemaker put in? And it kind of saying, I don't know whether that really makes sense. And I said, yes, please do that. And if anything else goes wrong, please do what you can. And Lawrence ended up, getting a pacemaker, first a temporary one, and then for various reasons, things that became a permanent thing. And that because that he lived another, I think maybe 3 years after that. But, you doubt the promises of the powers. When people say she needs a nursing home, or whatever it might be, what else might be, when people make promises about things, if you're going to be effective advocate protector, you got to be willing to ask some questions. It really helps to know the person individually, whatever kind of support you're giving, to make it relevant. And your loyalty in speaking up on a person's behalf has to be to that person, whether they're an older person or a person with a disability. It works better if the loyalty is to that person, and then instead of to somebody else. So like it can be really hard, say, for a teacher to be a good advocate for a youngster with a disability, because if they advocate to their bosses, they might end up getting fired. Does that make sense? So, and then it helps for the advocacy to be good, to be strong, to be effective, the protection. If there's a real commitment to the person, if there's a positive vision for a meaningful life, and in the medical sense, a really passion for a life that's rooted in a reverence for the person's life. You know, to if you the attitude that we hold in ourselves when we get involved in trying to help make decisions for someone who's got significant health vulnerability, just call it that, I guess, that our attitude is a pretty big and important thing that shapes what we're likely to do. And that if our headset is one where um, they'd be better off dead, then that becomes our expectation and will shape what we offer. And if our headset is one that um, I hope and want that for them to live, and that this is way there can be real meaning in life still, even though the person may be quite limited, then we're in a good place to offer protection that will push towards life and meaningful life, rich life for a person. I don't know whether I dare pick on you again, Nate, as an example of this.
Oh, go ahead.
But that there were people in Nate's life going back, to when he was a kid. There was a parent that you had cerebral palsy, Nate, from when you were real young, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with a positive vision for a meaningful life for you and a real commitment to you, and doubting the promises of the powers and the experts who said lots of he'll never do this or he'll never do that, and lots of loyalty to you. And a real passion for your life from the part of others, from the part of your parents, from at first, but then from others as well. That you have a pretty full and rich life that I think sometimes is almost too full, but that's your problem.
Yeah.
That does that make sense? If we're going to really offer protection and advocacy for a person, you got to believe in them and believe that their life is worth living, even though that there's ways that, life is pretty challenging for Nate. I mean, but real push for meaningful life and protection from harm. So, North Quabbin Citizen Advocacy, the mission, you guys haven't changed this, I don't think. It's an association to develop and support relationships for people who will benefit from guidance, companionship, and/or advocacy. And it's all people in the North Quabbin area. North Quabbin area looks to recruit people who will be advocate, protector, friends, sponsors into community life for people in devalued status, primarily people with intellectual disabilities, mental disorders, but also elders, who have some kind of mental limitation. So it's an association that's what North Quabbin Citizen Advocacy does. And there's principles about how to make that happen that really aren't our topic here tonight. They're listed here. And that's the contact information for North Quabbin Citizen Advocacy.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. Does anybody have questions, comments?
Did I rant for too long?
Oh no, I thought it was very good.
It's very interesting.
It was very good. Thank you.
Was it true?
Yeah, it strikes me how we talk about advocates and advocacy, and I think this some people it sounds complex or complicated, like, oh, I couldn't do that. But a lot of it, as Tom said, is just asking simple questions. Like, I think of one advocate for a lady, for a guy in the nursing home, and his advocate was just to ask questions. I noticed he's got a little sweat on his brow there. Why isn't his air conditioning on? And it just had accidentally got shut off. And there were just numerous questions like that. And she discovered that just by going down, if they knew she was going down, then he'd be dressed better, and his hair would be combed, and so it wasn't complicated or confrontational. It was a lot of it was just showing up and asking questions. And even during COVID, she would still call and ask questions.
And my part of the idea for offering a talk like this is that if people are kind of conscious of the realities, the stories we tell here, but the realities of people's vulnerability and of people's needs. If people are conscious of that, it makes it more likely that the people that citizen advocacy supports will be effective in seeing something going wrong and in sticking up for a person, and also be more effective in pushing for more opportunity. Like consciousness is a good thing. If we're conscious of a problem, we got a better chance of doing something meaningful about it.
Exactly. And the other thing I was thinking of is with consciousness is, um, certainly as a person, in a wheelchair, I can totally relate to, society making me feel like I'm a burden sometimes. But if I'm being honest, I totally catch myself thinking others are burdens at times. So the thoughts like that happen to us all, and it's not to it's not like some of us are are great people and never think negatively of people because of something that could be seen devalued. It's just all something that we all can work on together.
Yeah, quite clearly. Is there anything I said that made it sound like I was holier than thou?
Oh no. I was just saying that in general, that that like sometimes with nursing homes and stuff, I do it too. You freak out because we almost all have relatives in nursing homes, and a lot of times it's unavoidable these days.
Yeah.
But there's still simple ways which you can enhance the person's life or enhance their status, among others. Like my coworker Bonnie couldn't join us tonight, but I think most of you know her father, Vance Frank, um, who was a longtime minister in Orange, and she was working with us, and I would remind her of that you could do things to enhance his status.
Yeah, Vance was a really nice gentleman.
Yeah,
I
he
used to
was.
see him walk a lot when he was a lot stronger and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
and
Bonnie
yeah,
got
he was
to
a very well-known minister.
That's right, Will. Because Bonnie got to the point where she would go in the nursing home and be, oh, hi, Reverend. And some of the nurses weren't from around here, didn't know who he was, would say like, oh, wait a minute, did you say Reverend? You used to be a Reverend. So highlighting the person's status in the community instead of um, always as a patient. It's true that they're a patient, but they also had this other role.
Tell good stories about people.
Yeah.
And that those stories will help other people to see them more as full human beings, and not so much just like as the liver in room 202 or whatever it is.
I feel like when I talk, Tom, it's just like a continuation of me talking because you taught me all of you talking because you taught me all of it. That's okay. Tom doesn't copyright any of his material, which is very good.
Well, it's I have a lifetime of stealing material from other people.
Well, I don't want
Well,
to keep.
Tom, I'm going to sign off for now. So thank you, everybody, for a wonderful.
Well, thanks for joining us and for your
Thank
input.
you.
Yeah, and so we got the fair meeting on Wednesday night, right?
Yep, the fair meeting, 7 o'clock Wednesday night. That's in person.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Take care.
You too. God bless.
God bless. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Yeah, I was just gonna say I don't want to keep everyone. So thanks for joining. Thanks very much for coming to the presentation. And
Did you have
if
a
anybody
comment,
has any
Ron?
questions,
Yeah, I had a comment, or I wanted to address Tom. One thing Tom was saying about the keeping things in the background. I'd like to bring one of those things from the background into the foreground, if I may, about the hip.
Okay.
The other day, I think it was last week, I was getting off, checking something in the back of this truck. So I'm standing on a pile of rubble, big giant rocks and such. And I'm thinking I shouldn't step down from here. I shouldn't have even thought about doing what I was about to do. And it wasn't a big deal. These rocks weren't that big. I mean, it was just 4 or 5 inches off the ground. So I turn around and I fall down on my new hip that I just got last year. And so I'm happy that I have a new hip, because if I had landed on the old hip, it would have been a very bad situation. But in that moment, it was a lot of things became clear that mentally I was not thinking correctly. In that I'm think of myself as a physical person. However, I'm getting older, and I have to be a little bit more cautious. And in that situation, there's nobody else around to do what I was doing, but I could have done it a little bit slower and a little bit more mindfully, and it probably would have been okay. But it showed to me how vulnerable I was, because I put myself in a vulnerable situation in a little bit there. But I don't know what point I'm trying to make, but I'm glad that you're getting it done, because if you have a mental slip and a physical fall, it'll be much better with the brand new hip.
Much less.
Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
The thing that made me think of is that as we get older, we need to be more thoughtful, like you were just saying.
Mm-hmm.
My oldest brother, who's passed away, he got to be really, really cautious about everything. He was so cautious about everything that he ended up really doing just about nothing, or didn't end up doing anything at all. And that became a really big problem too.
Yeah.
So
he cascaded in the wrong direction. In a way.
Balance is really important.
Yes.
And that I'm thinking of this now, like I'm getting my hip done, but that I try every day to run the weed whacker for half an hour, or cut a little bit of the lawn, or pull a couple of weeds, or fix a little something around the house, just because I need to keep going. I need to keep doing stuff.
That's right.
But I also am quite sure that I'm not going to be taking down or putting up the storm windows this fall on the second floor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be a little bit of recovery time.
Yeah. Balance.
Yeah. Yes. But it'll be better. I'm confident that it'll be better.
Thank you.
Somebody else will do it for you this year, so then they'll know how. So next year they can do it again for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Part of the deal,
Mm.
One of the things I think we're all supposed to be doing is looking after each other here.
That's
Wow.
that's a big message I got from this presentation. Thank you very much. Is that how to make that, how can I facilitate helping that to happen? Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great way to end. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thanks
Thank you.
everybody. It was lovely talking and spending this time with you. And thanks for listening, for putting up with me.
Thank you and good luck.
Thank you, Tom.
Sir.
Marjorie.
Good.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you.
Good night, folks.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you, Tom.
Night.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you,
Thank
Jessica.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, Rosie.